Just want to make this a quick call. There's obviously a couple things that we can all talk about. I posted a couple of potential topics. I think the single sign-on is an interesting UX and kind of relevant topic to maybe start with. Powers, I don't know if you want to like talk about what the issue was with the single sign-on. Maybe give a little bit of context for like why people were getting prompted to sign in, even if they weren't using Dexible. What the signature represents, why people would be worried about it.
So maybe a little bit of background. When we originally developed the Dexible APIs, we implemented two different authentication mechanisms. One mechanism uses a signature-based approach where you sign the entire HTTP payload before you send it back to the API. And when I say sign, we're talking about using Ethereum private keys to do the signatures. The other approach is to basically establish a session using a JWT. So it's similar to the first approach, but essentially what happens is the background API will issue a payload to be signed by the client. If the client is able to sign that payload successfully and then send back the result of that to the API, it allows us to establish identity. The way we built this, we run a separate API per blockchain today. I think we're going to converge at some point, but early on we didn't have the foresight to design it that way, out of the gate. But as it stands today, we have separate backend APIs per chain that we support. I think we're up to 7 or 8 chains now. It turns out, though, it looks like I looked at our authentication code yesterday, and it looks like we already set up to support single sign-on across all of these separate backends. It's just never been turned on, essentially. So realizing that was pretty exciting because it's definitely been a pain point for our users. I think the front end guys are in the process of making a few small changes on the front end to use essentially a shared credential across all of our backend APIs. And then we should be ready to go for shipping that out. And what that means is you will still need to sign using MetaMask or another wallet one message to authenticate. We're not expanding our signing capabilities beyond that today, but at least we're going to reduce the number of signatures that you have to make. So when you switch between different networks, either through MetaMask or through the UI, you're not going to be prompted over and over for signatures. So it's going to cut down on friction quite a bit. And I think overall, it's going to provide a much better experience. We're also doing some detection on if the Dexible website is your active tab or not. And we can add some additional smarts to be even less aggressive in asking for signatures if you're browsing other sites and you have 1,000 tabs open like I do. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, that's super interesting. Lots of things to maybe dive into. The first thing is I guess I didn't realize there was like an active tab detection method that you could use. So you're only prompting the person to sign if I guess they're on the Dexible app and looking at it first off. And then so maybe you want to expand on how that works. I don't know if you know it or if that's some front end logic. So that's one thing. The second thing is this like a unique solution for Dexible in the way that we have our authentication happen with the different APIs today, right? Like the original solution that Mike had proposed an hour before you suggested yours was that we would have to merge all the APIs together in order for this to work. And then you're saying that no, it's actually possible to just have this token sit in the local storage, which just keeps that authentication continuing. So maybe like expand on that.
Sure. So my head was exactly where Mike Coons was at initially with this problem, actually, because we've discussed this problem a couple times, I feel like, over the past few months, because it is a pain point for users. And I'm not sure why, but thinking about the problem for like the 50th time, a light bulb went off and I realized, oh, wait, we're actually already set up pretty well to solve this. This is something of a it's not really a Dexible specific problem, but it is sort of implementation specific. So, you know, uh, other companies that have, backend infrastructure could certainly um, deal with similar issues. It's not totally uncommon. Um, but yeah, I don't know I don't know why it didn't click the first time. But sometimes after you write, I don't know how many thousands of lines of codes that we've wrote over the past few years, it you can't keep it all in your head all at once, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah,
as
fair.
far as the active tab detection goes, that's definitely more front end magic, and you probably don't want me writing too much front end code today. I can do it, but it's not going to be as good as what our front end team can do. So um, at a high level, I think they receive different browser events essentially when the user switches tabs. And that allows them to basically switch modes within the website, change the behavior. So I'm glad that they came up with like a completely different approach to trying to address this problem, because I think combining these two approaches of tweaking the way we authenticate and the front end tab detection is actually going to provide a better experience than either one of them would separately. So I'm definitely pretty excited that we're going to be able to roll this out quickly.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Just because not one person has like kind of talked about this, that multiple people have brought up that the signatures have been something of an issue, and on other sites, people don't exactly know what it means to sign something. It could be like if you get prompted, it could be someone trying to steal your stuff. Uh,
Right.
So it's important, I guess, for like the users kind of comfort using any sort of DApp that first off they know what the signature means and like they know why they're getting it. Two, it's not unprompted, so they don't think that someone's knocking on their door trying to break in when they're just off doing anything else. So
Yeah. The only other thing I think I have to add to the signatures and security concerns, and I totally agree. We definitely need to make sure we do a good job of um, sort of prompting the user before asking for the signature and letting them know what's about to happen and why it's about to happen. Um, but there is a general concern among people in the community about just the signature-based approach to authenticating in general, and that's certainly due to recent hacks and things like that, where people end up signing a malicious payload that can be submitted on chain as permission to steal tokens or do other malicious things. Um, we specifically format the payload that's to be signed in a way that would make it invalid to be a transaction. But that's pretty in the weeds. I think the average user probably hasn't spent time digging around, um, you know, kind of lower level APIs for doing signatures and things like that. And that being said, we don't have a great user experience for distinguishing between something that is harmless to sign and something that is going to, leave you wrecked. So I'm very interested in a project called login.xyz. They've basically built a very similar login mechanism to what we have at Dexible. Their solution was put out like within the last year or two, I believe. It's certainly newer than when we launched the sign-in procedures for Dexible, but I like the approach that they've taken with the signatures. It's a generic reusable library or set of libraries that a lot of different projects can use. But they do say they do suffer from the same security concerns that we hear about today, where it's still a signature for MetaMask. There isn't some standardized way to protect the user. But I'm hopeful, and I haven't been following this community closely, but I hope that they push forward and work with wallets to basically establish a way to make this safe, and a friendly user experience for people. And I think if we see traction on that front, I'd be highly motivated to switch Dexible's signature-based authentication over to using a login.xyz implementation. So I'm going to keep an eye on that, and I hope they make good progress.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting. I didn't know about this login project. So, yeah, hopefully they get integrated into some of those wallets. I feel like that would solve a lot of these security issues. So, hopeful. Mike, is there one thing that you've been working on that you'd like to share, or do you think everything that you're working on right now is too confidential? Because we can always talk about something else.
Yeah, I mean, my focus is on some future initiatives for Dexible. But one thing we are working on is to make our smart order router independent from third-party dependencies we have on like 0x, and just scaling that solution. So we ingest a lot of data about transactions that occur on the network, and since we operate on, what is it now, 6 or 7 different networks, ingesting all of that data into our data stores, we need to be able to scale that ETL, or extraction, transform and load ETL pipelines. And yeah, so like this morning we saw that we're backing up. Powers has everything instrumented, so we saw that we were like backed up 17 minutes. So basically, a transaction occurs on chain and it wouldn't be 17 minutes until we see it in our data stores. So we need to scale that up. So that's essentially what I'm trying to work on, is refactor how the ingest pipelines work. And then other than that, it's all some new smart contract logic that we'll be introducing in probably next few weeks.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that I want to talk about. First, I want to maybe ask about Matt's question in the blockchain chat. But before that, what does it mean to scale up an like this ETL pipeline? Does that mean that you have different functions on like an AWS, just constantly going out there and trying to read the state of some of these transactions, and that's what you're pulling back? What does it actually mean that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is just add more processes that do the same stuff to work a queue of messages off faster, right? So it's kind of like a work queue. You get a bunch of transactions pushed into that queue, and if you only have one worker on the other side pulling one at a time and processing, obviously you're only going to go as fast as that one process. So the quick solution is just add more instances of that processor so that you read the queue faster. So we're going to do that first. But ultimately, yeah, we need to scale. So basically, every transaction we look across, we pass it through our DEX integrations to see, does the transaction match UniV3? Does it match Bancor? Does it match, whatever? So we ultimately need to scale such that, UniV3 processing shouldn't back up Bancor transactions. But right now, since they're all in the same process, then that's essentially what's happening. So yeah, we're going to eventually split those out so that we have a bunch of micro workers. Each individual DEX will be represented individually in our infrastructure so that it makes it cleaner. But yeah, scaling up just means more processors.
Gotcha. Cool. So the second thing I was going to ask about, so related to the routing, when Matt's talking about kind of the trade-offs of having two contracts versus one. And like in the case of two contracts, would mean having a settlement and router contract.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about the additional transfers and causing more gas, I guess, to the end user. I guess your response is saying that more options for routing if they're separate router contracts. But does that mean that we want more contracts for efficient routing, or does it mean we want less contracts for more efficient use of transaction funds and gas points?
Yeah,
Like what are the trade-offs there?
Yeah, there are trade-offs, right? On the one side, if you combine the routing logic into a single contract, then he's right. You don't have to do a token transfer or spend allowance or anything for the the contract that you're about to call. The downside to that is now all the logic is coupled and sort of you get this huge spaghetti logic inside of one contract that basically you're coupled to it. Like you can't. The only way you could do routing at that point is to go through your contract instead of allowing us to open it up to other routers. So in the event that we can't find a route on our router, we still need to be able to fall back to 0x or some other solution in the future. So by abstracting it and separating that logic out into a separate router contract, the core logic of Dexible settlement is much simpler. It's easier to understand. Like I just call a router does the work. I check to see if I have the expected output, and I move on. So it's separating concerns. It's easier to maintain, easier to understand, and quite frankly, cheaper to maintain because any change in just routing, I'm only deploying a new instance of the router instead of all this other logic. It gets very expensive to deploy the new contracts. So it's a trade-off. I'm not opposed to bringing that router logic into Dexible when it's our native router, but that means we have to introduce like some kind of flag or indicator that this is our router and not a third-party router. It's doable. It's just it just makes it harder to maybe read the code.
Cool. Well, I feel like that's pretty much all I wanted to cover today. I think we talked about plenty of interesting things, right? We don't talk enough about the tech behind the scenes, but clearly we are some of the most technical people in this space, and we need to do a better job of communicating that. Oh, I want to mention one thing. I'd met someone has been a longtime member of the synthetics community at a DeFi community in Austin, and late 2021, December in Austin, we sponsored an event that was focused on it was just the DeFi Austin community. One of the guys in that community that came to this little hangout was this synthetics community member, and the one thing that he mentioned was that 1inch had integrated synthetics into its router and was starting to drive, I think, 20 plus million worth of volume through synthetics, and obviously that's huge for them because it gives them some utility, drives them some value. But it's like we're in the process of making our own. So in their like grants council chat, reached out and tried to start the conversation. Sounds like they're interested. Some of the core contributors are interested. They brought up this volume partner program for ongoing volume rewards if we manage to integrate it. So might be worth a conversation. I think it would be very cool to have some support, especially to show like this router has legs. So I'd be interested to see if there's more potential grants out there that we could sniff around for. If people are interested in these like volume-based programs. I mean, obviously this hasn't been, locked down or anything, but it's definitely worth having a conversation. Kind of guide the growth, help get this thing off the ground, and it seems like a win-win. So, Karat, you've been listening for a bit. Have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand. I can give you speaker access.
Hello. No questions. Just lovely to see Dexible being active. I remember meeting you, Mitch, at Decentral probably last year.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Yeah. So no, it's cool hearing all you guys speak and seeing it active and seeing that you guys are still moving. Definitely love it. So big power to you guys. Rooting for you guys, sending you guys the best energy.
Cheers, man. I love to hear it. I hope you have a great Friday. Like, that's some great Friday start of the weekend mojo energy.
Hell yeah.
Thank you.
Always.
Yeah.
Power to you guys.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, I'll go ahead and wrap this up. Karat, please feel free to join in the future as well. Trying to get this community all together, especially as we're about to make a pretty big announcement in the next couple weeks. So, yeah. Cool. Well, thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.